Thank you. So now we get to the exciting part of tonight's agenda, and I just have to say that it's really a pleasure to be a part of this panel that is going to have what I hope is a really healthy discussion about disability rights. Aside from being a DREDF board member, I'm also the Deputy Director of the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers. And I've had the privilege of co-founding a youth program called Yo Disabled and Proud, which stands for Youth Organizing. And the youth last year had decided that for the 25th anniversary of the ADA, they really wanted to learn more about the Americans with Disabilities Act and what that means to them as young people. And when Ingrid and the board were discussing what the annual event for DREDF was going to look like, I had mentioned to her that Yo Disabled and Proud was doing ADA forums around the state, and that they were growing rather popular, that it was not just a way for young people to learn about their civil rights and what the ADA really meant, but for their families and professionals and community members to also take part in the discussion as participants of the activities and events that we've been putting on. So Ingrid had said, I think that would be wonderful for DREDF to do too, and I have been so excited to do this all year long, because while I've been doing it with young people around the state, the theme of tonight's event is intersectionality. And part of intersectionality is not just racial groups and people with different types of disabilities, but it's also about the intergenerational folks that represent our community. And to me, that's really, really cool that DREDF is having the opportunity, and I think they might be the only ones doing it, which makes it even cooler, to have an intergenerational dialogue around what the Americans with Disabilities Act has been about and what it looks like in the future for young adults and youth with disabilities, whether they're youth that are really young or what we refer to now as Generation ADA youth. So I want to start off this conversation tonight with Mary Lou, because Mary Lou's been around. She's one of the co-founders of DREDF, and she, did she just give me the eyeballs like you did not just say that, girl? She's gonna kill me afterwards. So we've been discussing the right questions to ask and how to hold this conversation, and we will give people an opportunity if we have the time to also chime in. But Mary Lou has been around, and she can give us sort of like the lay of the land of what it looked like before some of us were here and involved. So Mary Lou, with your wisdom, which I appreciate and I respect and admire Mary Lou so much, what was the behind-the-scenes organizing experience like when advocates like you were working to get the Americans with Disabilities Act passed?
Well, thank you for this very modest question. Hi, everybody. It's really lovely to be here and to see so many folks joining us for our 36th and the ADA's 25th. Actually, the question that Christina just asked is one that I would, if she would permit it, which I don't think she will, would actually pass on to Marilyn Golden, who was, in fact, one of the key organizers of the community around the country during the ramp up and enactment of the ADA, along with Liz Savage, who many of you know, who was with the Epilepsy Association at the time of the ADA. I am going to invoke Marilyn and channel her, because she is the one who was really out in the trenches. One of the interviews that we did for the ADA 10th that is posted on our website, and that some of you may have seen on social media, is an interview with Marilyn where she talks quite a bit about what it was like to be doing community organizing during the ADA. This of course was when we used 2 tin cans and a string to communicate. Google was not a part of our landscape, nor was the internet. In fact, we barely had fax machines. So we were relying on communicating the old-fashioned way, by telephone, by mail, and by fax. And Marilyn, along with Lizzie and others, but largely Marilyn, identified advocates in every state, every single state, who were activists and who were very committed to disability rights issues, to be lead people within that state as the bill was moving through Congress and as issues came up where we needed pressure on specific members of Congress in the state on a particular issue. And she tells a great story about a problem coming up during the Senate deliberations of the ABA, and Bob Michaels, who was the Republican Senate leader at the time, apparently had taken a really bad position on something that was at issue for the negotiators. And Maryland was able to call upon the advocates in Illinois, this is not around the Chicago area, but in southern Illinois, and asked that they set up a peaceful but informational picket outside the senator's office and maintain that vigil for 24/7 until there was some movement on the issue. And she then noted that, in fact, this was such a successful effort that the staff members of the senator came out and started offering hot chocolate to the demonstrators because they really couldn't believe they were sitting out in the cold taking these positions and refusing to budge. And in fact, this kind of community organizing went on all over the country. Organizations were responsive to a phone call. Something came up at 10 o'clock in the morning. The phone call went out. The advocates at the state level immediately acted, made the calls, visits got into the offices of the appropriate person, and were really able to influence the process in a very, very powerful way. And this went on day in and day out over a period of the time that the ramp up to the legislation was taking place. So it was a terrific period of unanimity, I think, across the disability community around the country. But I thank and salute Marilyn for her work on that.
Thank you, Marilyn. And thank you for channeling Marilyn, Mary Lou. I thank you for setting the stage for the rest of our panelists. I really want to take this opportunity to welcome the rest of our panelists. Nubian Scott is next to Mary Lou. Yomi Ram and Maddie Bugalo. Again, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to have this intergenerational dialogue about what disability civil rights looks like and the history of our movement. And I want to move to Nubian, because all of us on the stage entered the disability rights movement at a different time. And whether we were born with a disability or ended up having children with disabilities, our experiences have all been a little bit different. Nubian, in your opinion, what is the most significant thing that the Americans with Disabilities Act has done for you or for people with disabilities in general?
In my opinion, I feel like the most important thing in general is just basically giving people with disabilities a seat at the table. And I feel like we're getting closer and closer to a point where no matter what the discussion is, people are coming to know that you have to have a person with disability in order to represent that spectrum. And I feel like without the ADA, that probably wouldn't exist right now, and it definitely wouldn't be a part of companies who are advancing technology and things like that. I think those companies are sort of where the rest of us are leading our lives. People with disabilities, technology is just entwined in their life and it's not thought about. And I feel like we're getting to a point where technology is going to be the same way for people with disabilities. And many people with disabilities do have access to technology. It's like how you operate, how you're able to be mobile, for instance, or to assist you to be mobile, or use a computer or be competitive in a job or at school. And I feel like that's becoming more recognized, and I definitely think the ADA was an integral part of that and the impetus for that.
Thank you, Nubian. Yomi, thank you. You were born with a disability and grew up in Southern California in a pretty rural community. In your opinion, what has been the most significant part of the ADA for you?
Well, so for me, it was all the stuff kind of that happened. ADA. So the ADA was signed into law the year I graduated from high school. But, you know, there are other things that laid ground before that, such as the independent living movement and some of the laws that allowed me to be in public school. I was segregated for a few years. in what they called a special school, and then my parents were able to advocate for me to go to public school, and you know, I'm from the Bronx, and then my family did this crazy thing. We moved to a little desert town in the high desert called Apple Valley. I'm sure nobody has ever heard of it. In the Mojave Desert, and you know, so there were, you know, there was a lot going on. I was the first student with a disability to go to my public school, and I was the first student with a significant disability to not be segregated in my high school. And so it was very interesting for me to be going to school, like riding the short bus with students and going to the same place, but then they would go to the portables that were like at the back of the campus, and I never saw them again until after school when we would get on the bus. So I had we were like in these parallel but very strange and different universes. And when I graduated from high school, you know, nobody ever talked to me about the ADA. I wasn't at all involved in the disability community. And it wasn't until I was in college and getting involved with women's studies, and specifically Black feminist studies, that we didn't call it intersectionality. That's sort of a nuanced term. It was just my life. And it was learning in the women's movement that I did not have to rank oppressions or check some part of my identity at the door in order to do movement work or to be part of movements. And so, you know, and the ADA just, it has given me sort of a framework for being able to move through the world and to be able to speak about very specific rights that I'm entitled to as a person with a disability. And, you know, so I'm really honored to be on this stage with Mary Lou and to know Marilyn and for all of the work that Dred has done to lay that ground for all of us. For me, it really started even before the ADA, and it was like this highfalutin concept of independent living that that's always been really important in my life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And the ADA for me came around when I was in 5th grade, and I had a very similar experience to you. But what I find so fascinating is that now that I'm a parent of children with disabilities, and one of them has significant multiple disabilities, they still have the same running parallel programs. What's up with that, right? I had no idea. I thought that those kinds of segregated programs were completely abolished, but it tells me as a parent and as an advocate that we still have so much work to do in this movement.
Absolutely.
Maddie, in your opinion, with somebody who has a non-visible disability, what's been the most significant part of the ADA to you?
Sure. So I was born after the ADA was passed. I was -2 when the ADA passed. And I acquired my disability, which is a chronic illness, when I was in high school. And for me, I think growing up after the ADA, and for a lot of my friends who are around the same age, what's been really significant for us is that it's not that we take for granted that the ADA exists, but we take for granted that we should have rights, and that we should be able to go to school, and that we should be able to, you know, go to college and have our accommodations, and that it's not, you know, like having special accommodations or anything like that. It's just something that's leveling the playing field, and that we should be included in every aspect of society. And so I think for me, growing up after all of this incredible work has been done, it was really amazing, because I think I never felt that it never would have occurred to me that I wouldn't be able to go to school with all of my friends, or that I wouldn't be able to have the same opportunities. And then I think then when I did, you know, run into some discrimination when I was in high school and trying to get accommodations, and the school administration didn't want to give them to me because they looked at me and they said, well, there's nothing wrong with you. That then I was able to fight back and advocate for myself. And then when I encountered difficulties with professors in college, that I knew that I could go to the administration and say like, hey, this professor is not giving me this accommodation, and I know that they're not legally allowed to do that, so what can we do to fix this? And so I think for me, having a non-apparent disability is interesting in the disability rights movement because I'm sure when I got up on stage, people were like, what's she doing up there? Because, people see me and they don't think I have a disability. But knowing that I have those same rights and knowing that I have a place in this movement and that I can point to the ADA and say that I am protected by this law just as much as anybody else who has any other kind of disability has been really powerful and really empowering for me.
Can you say, Maddie, thank you, a little bit more about, it's been very empowering for you, and you're very active in disability rights around the country now. How are other young people with non-visible disabilities, how can they find their place and get active in disability rights?
Yeah, I think that's definitely, it's a really important question. I know I sort of came to the disability community like sideways. I came in through like a chronic illness community online and sort of found people there, and then from there sort of started finding a larger disability community. And I think it's really important that when we're talking about being inclusive in our disability communities, that we name non-apparent disabilities as people who are part of the disability community. And I think especially, mine, I think I mentioned is a chronic illness, but there are a lot of people with non-apparent mental health disabilities. And then I know I was really active in advocacy work in college, and the bulk of our disabled students organization were people with mental health disabilities. And I know that is something where people don't always feel like that they have been included in the disability community, and there have sort of been the sense of disability hierarchy sometimes, where people will sort of throw people with other types of disabilities under the bus. And I think as a movement, we have to be better about saying that, we're all here and we're all together, and, you wouldn't say like, sometimes you hear somebody say, well, I have a physical disability, but at least my brain is okay. Or you hear somebody who, has a mental health disability sometimes might say like, well, at least I can walk. And I think those kinds of comparisons are just like tearing us apart instead of bringing us together. And I know when I was in college and we did a lot of cross-disability work, we were always really careful to assert that everybody is valuable, every body has worth, and that we are all inherently part of the same struggle, and that we are all suffering because of ableism, which manifests itself in different ways for different people, but is the same system of oppression.
Thank you, Maddie. Exactly why I asked her that question. Yomi, I want to move back to you. How does the diverse intersectionality of our community impact the way we advocate and protect our disability rights?
Well, I think you just had an example here, and I don't want to sound ageist, right? Like, and I don't want to be like, oh, that was, but I'm really inspired by youth and by the people, the next generation that are talking about disability rights in a very different way than I've heard it talked about, and the way that younger people especially are injecting into the movement and into the platform this notion of intersectionality and talking about inclusion in a different way and in some nuanced ways, especially around race and especially around hidden disabilities, because I didn't really hear people talking about that too much. I would even say a decade ago. So it's just, I think that Maddie articulates exactly what that vision is. And it makes me feel that the future is really bright. Yeah.
It's cool. Thank you for that. Mary Lou, so when folks were working on the ADA, a lot of the leaders that we know now, or young people consider leaders and young adults consider leaders, they were young back then, right? And yet they were young. We're like, wow, they were in college, some of them were even younger than college. It's really amazing to see that, and to see that where the intersectionality lies now when it comes to disability organizations and the age of folks that they hire and their level of experience. What do you think about bringing young people and getting them involved in the disability rights movement? Like, why is that important? And quite frankly, is it important? And what does the leaders of the community who started it really believe or think about that?
Well, you know, it seems to me that what's been said up to now about the incredible insight of young people with disabilities sort of answers that question, that it's extremely important to involve young people and to bring people into the organizations that have been around for a long time. But honestly, it's my observation that young people with disabilities are creating their own incredible spaces in the disability movement and their own incredible interpretations of the new issues that are on the table that are the issues of their generation. And I mean, I am of the civil rights generation. The young people with disabilities today are of a different generation with a different vision. And it does not mean that the vision that we had was the wrong vision. It means that the new vision is the one that's going to lead us forward. And it does seem to me that that vision is embracing a human rights perspective more so than only a civil rights perspective. The fact that we're talking about intersection in this event today, but also we're talking about it everywhere. We're talking about it online, we're talking about it in the writings that we're doing. We are really deeply engaging with these extreme social disadvantaged categories that many of us embody, but that we haven't really named or called out or acknowledged in a way that gives equal weight to all of them. So I'm very optimistic that young people are doing what they need to do in this new world, and that for those of us who have been around a long time, we thank you for your leadership and for embracing these new topics and these new issues. And I think that always there's a place. It needs to be a place in all of our lives and our organizations for these new ideas and these new leaders.
So Nubian, you've had some experience. I had the fortunate opportunity of working with you a little while at the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, and you also interned just recently here at DREDA. Are young adults finding space in the disability rights movement, and where do you think that's happening, and how can our communities, through intergenerational communities, how can we work together to further our rights and movement?
I definitely think people like Maddie, and even myself to an extent, are finding space in the community. And
Hold on.
Testing, okay. So I definitely feel like we're finding our space in the community, and personally, what I have felt is the most beneficial is mentorship. For instance, when I was at DREDF, Namita Gupta, who's a staff attorney at DREDF, and Arlene Mayerson, who everyone in this room is probably familiar with, were awesome mentors and basically made me feel like my voice mattered, even though I walked into the room with much less knowledge than them. And I feel like that is an incredibly important part, is to offer education, but also to encourage people to feel like they have a voice. And I think once people feel like they have a voice, especially youth, because in a lot of cultures you're told to shut up pretty much until you're old enough to get out of the house. And I feel like, it's part of African American culture. It's like, especially Southern culture, you're probably familiar. It's like, until you're a certain age, you don't know anything about life, so you should just learn. But I feel like an important part of mentorship is teaching, and then also helping people find their voice and putting them in positions where they can speak up and they can do their part. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Nubian. So we've heard a little bit about people referring to the disability narrative tonight. What is the disability narrative out in society today versus when we were growing up? Even though we're all from different generations, I think it's still changed quite a bit from the time we were youth. Yomi, would you like to start?
Sure. So in my family, there were other, in my nuclear family, I was the only person with a apparent disability. But in my extended family, there were other people with disabilities in my family. And so nobody really used the term disability, but like my aunt who was blind would like take me all over the city. And, and she was raising her family, and my great-grandmother was deaf and she didn't sign. And so, we communicate, it wasn't like a thing in my family because there were other people with disabilities in my family. But I can, I'm old enough, I'm on my third career. And in my first career, maybe I should try. Is that better? And in my first career, I was a reporter. And so I wrote for a bunch of different newspapers. And, and I went through this phase of like never wanting them to assign me a story about disability, because I didn't want to be like that reporter that's pigeonholed and that's the only thing I can write about. But even just in the media treatment of disability, I've seen a big change, because I think that there used to be a lot more coverage about, inspiration and, people with disabilities being pitied, but also being really targets of the scorn of business and industry. Being framed as, we're sort of this drain on society, and I see through different movements and as our culture has evolved, I think that I'm seeing better coverage in the news media, and I think, for good or for bad, reality shows and anytime that we can see people with disabilities, for good or bad, being represented in the public realm, then that means we're not being symbolically annihilated from that space. And so visibility, I think, is helping, and I think it's a good thing, and hopefully, the culture will evolve and we'll start seeing more diverse and accurate representations of our lives. But I think it's getting better.
Well, yeah, I was really hoping that you would address your work in the media and how that, whether or not it's changed. I also really think that the disability narrative can be different depending on where you are in the country and where you are in the world. So I'd like to ask Maddie, since she's from the East Coast, is the disability narrative different on the East Coast, or has it been in the past versus your experience in California? You are in the birthplace of the disability rights movement.
I'm not sure that there's that much of a difference from coast to coast. Sorry, I know, that's like, I wish I had like some really exciting answer about how the East Coast was doing this thing and the West Coast was doing this other thing. I think, in both places, I didn't, learn about people with disabilities growing up. In schools, I didn't learn about disability history, and, it wasn't, I was an American Studies major, so I took, history classes in college, and one class mentioned Ed Roberts, but that was it, and I took a lot of history classes. So, I think it's really across the board. I know things have gotten better, but we're still really underrepresented in the media. Our perspectives are, not valued. I know when I see articles written about people with disabilities, it's so often like the parents of people with disabilities who are quoted, or like experts who don't have disabilities, or they go to the organizations who aren't actually like run by disabled people to get their, expert analysis. And so, I find that frustrating. And I think like fictional representations are still, you still sort of have the like dichotomy of like, either like really, inspiring and like super cheerful, and like we look at you and we're just so happy that we're not disabled because your life seems so terrible, but you inspire us to be better people. Or you have like the like evil villain, like, which is often like a hunchback or somebody with like a very like either like explicitly or like coded as having a visible disability. And so, I think like, because I don't have like a really long time ago media to compare it to, I think I'm just frustrated with how we're being portrayed. And and especially that we're not getting the chance to tell our own stories in the way that we should be.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, you know, that's sometimes a lot of the reasons why people, whether they have visible or non-visible disabilities, want to identify as people with disabilities at all, is because of the disability narrative. So I'd like to turn the mic over to Nubian if she has one that's working, I hope.
Yes.
And ask you about that. Like, what was the disability narrative for you growing up, and how has it changed? Because I know you sort of have had a coming out experience.
Right. I didn't grow up with people who identified as having disabilities. Like, now that I think about it, tons of people in my family currently and when I was growing up had disabilities, but I think it's just part of my culture. We framed you having a disability when it was time for you to check like a box for you to apply for a program because that disability infringed upon your ability to maintain employment or be able to drive yourself around or things like that. And so you had to sign up for this program and they put this label on you saying you were handicapped or you had a disability, and then you got your benefits and you went about your way, but when you went home, you didn't talk about that. And so I grew up in a family with no one who identified that way, so I grew up my whole life trying not to be different, and that was my experience until I actually, law school is the experience where I realized that like, no one here looks like me. When people think of an attorney, they don't think of someone who looks like me. People who come from where I'm from, and that taught me to value the diversity and the experiences that I bring. And when I got the chance to work at CFILC, I was introduced to the disability community on the social side, and I learned about the history and Ed Roberts and things like that. Yeah, I'm a well-educated person. I've taken tons of history classes as well, and I think there's no reason that a 10-year-old shouldn't know who Ed Roberts is. And imagine the power that would bring to someone is to know that movement and what that movement did, and for someone to grow up their entire life knowing that and how that could change the trajectory of their life, I think is awesome. So I feel like it's changed now that the narrative to me is self-identification. And during my time at CFILC, I came to self-identify as a person with a disability, and I really feel like becoming a part of the community has changed my life absolutely for the better. And I invited my family tonight, so I feel like I have the chance to incorporate them in that, and we can learn together. Hi. So yeah, that's my story.
Very, very cool. Mary Lou, what's the difference now versus then?
That's such a great question because I think that the narrative is represented in the way you're treated out in the public sphere, in addition to how you're described in, a news article or by a television reporter. And having lived 30 years of my life before the ADA, and I don't know how many before its predecessor, Section 504, much of the experience of a person with a quite obvious and visible disability, being and living in the community and being on the street, and having grown up without the benefit of even the idea of civil rights, is that it has changed profoundly, I think. Even though, as a disability rights advocate, every day I look at the same stuff you guys look at and am horrified at the way we're referred to in everything that's written and in the kinds of negative references that we see in every media. On the other hand, the experience of growing up and being out and about as a person with a disability, young person with a disability, without any benefit of the disability rights movement, I can tell you, and those of you who are in my age range will relate to this, that it was very hard to be on the street. It was very difficult. There was very significant fear, and this is the fear, pity, and prejudice kind of syndrome, where you are stared at and not welcomed where you're going. I have been asked to leave restaurants. I've been not seated at restaurants. I've been told I can't enter a movie theater or other kinds of venues. I've really encountered in my youth the kind of external and aggressive prejudice that comes with having a disability in an environment, in a world that does not have a civil rights framework. And it has changed very dramatically. You would not walk down the streets of most American cities, and you might encounter a little bit of, the vibe that you get if you have disability that's visible. But on the other hand, you will be much more embraced or ignored, as everybody ignores everybody walking down the street, which is perhaps the best measure of success. Things have changed really radically in many, many ways, and yet, of course, we have huge hurdles yet to get over. But I think that we really should celebrate what has come and how we've benefited so far.
Thank you for that. So one of the wonderful things that I've gotten to do with youth with disabilities through Yo Disabled and Proud is back in 2009, they passed a resolution for Disability History Week, and we've been trying to get schools across California and 20 other states across the country have Disability History Week or Disability History Month. And while we've gotten a number of schools to literally register on our Yo Disabled and Proud page that they're gonna do something for Disability History Week, we go back and follow up and say, well, so what are you doing? We have all this curriculum and resources available for you to use. And more often than not, they say, oh, we're gonna do a disability awareness training. And we ask, what does that look like? And, do we really need to do disability awareness training, and what age group is it? And is it really disability cultural competency training? Because maybe we should do that with staff before we do that with students. But I bring that up because I'm really trying to get it into my daughter's school right now. It's the second week of October each year in California. And I'm trying to offer some suggestions for them to do, because if we don't continue to work on changing that disability narrative, non-disabled people will think they're doing the right thing and try to do it for us. So what I mean by that is schools will say, well, we're gonna do it by teaching people about wheelchairs and disability awareness, and let them try to use a walker or a wheelchair or hearing aids for the day and do simulation exercises. And I'm like, no, that's not disability history. Let me give you some other ideas and ways that you can do it. And I think that that's really important, and that's how we're going to continue to change the narrative, is by giving people an opportunity to learn from us as people with disabilities what it means to acknowledge disability history and other things in our community in a way that is way more appropriate and responsible of them. Thank you. I'm going to give everyone in the audience an opportunity soon to ask questions, so be thinking of them. The 50th anniversary of the ADA will be in 2040. That seems like a long time from now, but what do you hope is different compared to today? And I want to start with Maddie.
All right. So when I think about disability now, I really think about it as a social justice issue, and I think about it in terms of what we can do and what we must do to combat ableism, and in many different ways how ableism manifests in terms of the underemployment that we know is so rampant in the disability community. We know that we still have so many issues with transportation. We have, of course, the school to prison pipeline, which, disproportionately affects students of color with disabilities. We have police violence against people with disabilities, again, which disproportionately impacts people of color with mental health disabilities. And I just want to see a world in 2040 where disability is understood as a social justice issue, where disabled people are really valued, where everybody is valued because of their inherent worth. And I think sometimes when we talk about things like employment, which is so important, we can get a little bit caught up in, well, this person is valuable because they can work, and don't you see that they can work, and so they can contribute to society. And I think we have to shift to valuing everybody because they're a human being and because they have value as a human being. Yeah, and so I hope that we have that huge shift in understanding, an understanding of what it means to have a disability, and that we see true integration, that institutions are no more, that segregated environments are no more, that restraint and seclusion in school is no more. And I could go on and on and on. There are so many issues, but I really think that if we have if society at large has a different mindset about disability, if we can name and combat ableism in all of its forms, that we will really be able to move forward as a community and really live in the world that we deserve to live in. So, thanks.
Thank you. And that's a lot, so I know you're a community organizer. You're going to be organizing everybody to help with that, right? Good, good, good. Yomi?
25 years from now. So if I'm alive, I'll be retired, hopefully. And, really the thing that, to make it very personal, the thing that I obsess over and worry about is how am I going to age? And what does aging well with a disability look like? What is long-term care going to look like? Will my rights be protected? Will I have expanded rights? Will I be able to continue to be in charge of my life? And, who will care for me and can I direct that? And will I have the resources to be able to do that? I don't plan on going quietly into an institution, but if I have to, what will the institution look like? I'm very concerned about those things, and so, my hope is that just like the ADA influences so much, it influences every aspect of our life, the built environment and everything, and now I work in healthcare, and I see the influence of the ADA, these principles, and how we're trying to hardwire that into the healthcare system, and what does that look like in reducing health disparities for people with disabilities. I'm thinking about, what is it going to be like for me when I'm 70? I want expanded options, and I want options beyond what some people are calling death with dignity, which is such crap. And we have to fight that, right? And so I think that if people had better choices, that they wouldn't be thinking about killing themselves. And so, that's what I'm thinking about when I think about the future and the impact of the ADA and what opportunities lie ahead of us.
A lot of work to be done. Nubian?
When I think about the future, the two words that come to mind are investment and integration. I really feel like in 25 years, with the technology that we have, with the awareness that exists, with the legislation that's on the table, with the litigation that's in the courtrooms right now, there shouldn't be a reason why when you leave your house as a wheelchair user, you shouldn't be able to experience life in a way that's not inhibitive on a daily basis. There isn't a reason for that. There isn't a reason why we can't invest in our infrastructure in order to allow that. I feel like whether you're a student taking an online class and you need audio descriptions for things like that, require investment by our government and require us to increase awareness and require for integration to be valued. I think when you are aware of something, and that helps to increase the value that you attach to it. And I feel like we definitely have to increase our voices in the community as individuals, that when you're in a room with people who aren't necessarily connected to the disability movement, to make your voice heard and make those issues heard. And that brings awareness, and value attaches when that comes to it. And those people walk out into the world and make moves and make changes in the world. And I feel like everything is sort of connected in that way, and that we need both of those in order to help our future.
Thank you, Nubian. 2040, Mary Lou. Where are we going to be?
Maybe we'll be in this room, you never know. Well, I have to say that, first of all, I completely agree with what everybody has said. I think all of those visions for the future are exactly on track. I have to say, though, I really worry about the economic inequality that the disability community experiences. And I don't see that we have a good set of tools at our disposal to try to address some of those issues. And it's very worrisome to me that we are getting sort of further away from a goal economic justice. And I'm hoping that the sort of call arms for the next generation is to tackle that issue in a way that really looks at systemic and structural changes that we might be able to work on. This is not so much about an ADA solution as it is about a broader societal solution. One of the things that actually a number of people here and around the country have been talking about what's your vision for 50 years from now? And I think Arlene Mayers and a couple of other people spoke at a recent conference where that was one of the topics. And in thinking about that, in light of what I think I know about today, one of the other worries I have, this is rather than a vision, my concern is that we are on an incredible technology trajectory, both in terms of developing electronic tools, new medicines, new devices, new implants, and I wonder how we're even going to define disability 25 or 50 years from now. Is it going to be the person who can't afford the device or the item that might mitigate an impairment of some kind, rather than the existence or presence of the impairment? And I'm wondering if our social model might morph into something that looks more like that than what we're looking at today. So it seems to me that we have some huge challenges ahead. We have enormous potential for solving some of these problems. We have some real challenges, and I'm hoping that economic justice is sort of high on the list.
Thank you for that. I would just add, and it's somewhat along the same lines, is I really hope to see that marriage equality is an option for people with disabilities on benefits, because I think that it's totally crap that people can't get married just because of the benefits they're receiving from the government. And secondly, near and dear to my heart, I hope that more people with disabilities know that it's okay to have children, because I think it's really important for all people to know that families are great, and whether you have a disability or not, you should have that option and choice to be able to make on your own and not be influenced by medical professionals or family members who don't think that it's the right decision, whether you have a genetic disability or non-apparent disability that's not genetic. With that, I want to turn it over to the audience. We have a few minutes. Are there any questions from the audience for the panel? And I see one hand up, and Susan's going to bring the mic, so hold on one sec. And Alex, if you could get any closer, that would be helpful.
First of all, thanks, Christina, for noticing me. There was a camera between us, but good vibes. So, within the younger generation, I think the advocates of the disability rights movement and the folks that worked to pass the ADA did a phenomenal amount of work, and within our generation, there's a certain amount of, I think, complacency. And I'm wondering what the panelists think about how to bring us on board, and the challenges, number one, that brings with bringing us on board, and the challenges of not having enough of us on board already.
So thanks for your question, Alex. So I disagree that there's complacency, but I agree that there aren't enough of us in the movement, and I think that has a lot to do with the need to make the movement more welcoming for youth and young adults with disabilities. And I think that has a lot to do with the perspective on disability that young people are bringing, that we are coming in and we're expecting that people at organizations, want to talk about ableism and want to talk about intersectionality. And we might look at some of these organizations and we see that their boards or their staff, maybe are all white or only have one or two people of color. And we look at that, and that, to us is this is maybe not an intersectional organization. Maybe this is not an organization that's doing the kind of social justice work that we believe is important. And so I think also organizations need to reach out to youth and reach out, and that can be, you know, in terms of having youth programs, having youth groups, and then including young people in their programs. And, you know, especially if you're talking about like kids in like K through 12, you know, if you're having an event for parents on advocacy, seeing how you can integrate kids into that as well, so that young people can get started on advocacy really young. So I think those are some thoughts about how to bring more young people into the movement. But it's a really good question.
Does anyone else want to ask?
I just want to point out that what you're calling complacency might actually be the fact that you're able to live your life without having to fight every single step of the way to get someplace, to get into or out of, or to get the accommodation that you need. And that actually you are, I don't think we're talking about you, but we're talking about people who you may think are complacent, are actually benefiting tremendously from the advances of the disability rights movement because you have choices. And if you choose to live a life other than as an advocate, that was the goal of the movement. So I applaud the fact that you can make those kinds of choices. I also agree with Maddie that I think the presence of extraordinary young advocates means that there are really terrific people coming into the movement who are going to be taking hold of the emerging issues and really working on them, and that there's room for people who want to do other things, and there is a huge need for really new and emerging young advocates, but we are seeing them. So I think there's opportunity in both spheres.
Thank you both Maddie and Mary Lou. Do we have another question in the audience? We do, in the back, on the right. Susan's coming with a mic right now. It's a good conversation, right? Very thought-provoking.
What's our attitude be in regards to organizations that have the potential to sometimes be helpful but are very problematic in other ways, such as Autism Speaks?
Great question. Who would like to answer this question? Maddie knows a little bit about it, so I'll let her start and then I'll pass it.
I mean, I think, I think the Autism Speaks example, I mean, I think this is perhaps a statement without nuance, but I think Autism Speaks is kind of evil because they want to eliminate autistic people, which frankly is eugenics. And so I think we shouldn't be cooperating with organizations that don't believe that people with disabilities should exist, or that people can be separated from their disabilities. So I think in terms of those organizations, I think we do need to draw a line at a certain point, and then we also need to speak out against those organizations and say, like, this is not our community, this is not what we believe. We believe in the value of people with disabilities. We believe that being disabled is valuable, that we have unique ways of being and understanding and moving through the world that are useful and valuable. And so in terms of those organizations, I do think we need to draw a line and say, we cannot work with those organizations. I think far more common are organizations that really want to do good work and maybe have done some good work but are still struggling on some issues or still have a lot of room to grow. And I think, all organizations have a lot of room to grow. And I think in the case where we can really recognize people's good intentions and recognize people's willingness to move forward and to learn and that they're open to new ideas and new perspectives, then that's a matter of bringing in people whose voices have been traditionally underrepresented in the movement and learning from each other. And stating that it is our goals to create a more intersectional and diverse movement, and to really acting on those values.
Yeah, I think the answer to an organization like Autism Speaks is the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. I think you have opportunities If there is an organization or a movement that isn't working for you, then there is space for you to either create or join something that does speak for you. And I don't necessarily think we need to shut down voices that we don't agree with, but I think we need to have a counterbalance. And that's how you move the issues forward. Yeah.
And I just want to add in closing that I think it's really important for us to educate those type of organizations, because I worry about that too, and that was one of the other topics is prenatal testing and all the things that are happening to eliminate disability. That's one of the things I'm also very concerned about, and anybody who wants to eliminate disability while I'm teaching disability pride, that's kind of counterintuitive to what I'm doing with my own children. So I think there's room for everybody, but I think there needs to be a lot of education from people with disabilities ourselves. But I want to thank Maddie, Yomi, Nubian, and Mary Lou for taking part in this panel discussion. It was really, really wonderful to have this opportunity to have this dialogue, and I see some nods heading in the audience, moving in the audience. So I think we did a really good thing tonight by having this conversation. I hope you all are enjoying your evening and are having a wonderful time with us tonight. I appreciate you coming to tonight's event and just want to thank you for supporting DREDF.